All right. So it's going live on the internet. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about income inequality. We've talked about sort of talked about income inequality before while discussing capitalism, but yeah, I just wanted to go back to the subject and I guess talk about income inequality specifically. I don't know if you guys did any reading for it or watched any videos. I watched a couple of really interesting documentaries today. One was called Saving Cap. I think I had seen both of them before at some point, but I didn't remember everything. So one of them was called Saving Capitalism, and the other one, Capital in the 21st Century, which is also a book. That one is based on a pretty influential book. Actually, Ritam, I think he's read that book, and it's about
Piketty?
the evolution. Yeah, Piketty. Yeah. And the documentary is not like the book. The book is like this basic, it's like this huge,
Sure.
book. It's like what, 600 pages long, 700
Yeah.
pages. So it's like this big dissertation on capitalism and all that. The documentary is really just 2 hours long. And it's kind of just like based on it. But I thought it was really interesting. So maybe let's start by what do you guys think about income inequality? Is it a real thing? And is it bad, or is it good, or is it bad, or is it moral, immoral? Maybe we can start by kind of like exploring some of those questions.
So yeah, I thought about this a lot. I feel like we don't want income inequality, but at the same time, I think often just giving people money is not the full solution. So like I'm for like somewhat of a progressive tax bracket, but I think a lot of I think we want to fix the problem at the root more, like what's causing the inequality rather than like, for example, disparities in education, and just how you're raised, and yeah, so education and how your parents raise you, I feel like, are two very influential factors that sort of predict your future income.
Now, is this a global problem or is it just the United States?
I'm personally not sure. I'm not, but yeah, I would assume it's global. But
I think measures of income inequality worldwide, and then also in countries within countries, have been mostly worsening. Becoming more unbalanced. To get a more neutral, use a more neutral term. And yeah,
I think it's a global thing. I think it's if you want to look at it as a problem, I personally think it's a problem. And I think it's it's certainly a global phenomenon, which doesn't mean there isn't it's also a problem in the United States, I should say, but it's certainly a global phenomenon that exists all over the globe. Because we have a pretty international economy at the end of the day. I mean, there is such a thing as an international economy, international finance. There's a pretty big degree of interconnectivity between different countries, especially on the financial side. So it's and certainly the concentration of wealth. Like if you look at the statistics, there's certainly a degree of concentration of wealth that is increasing as the years go by. And this is a tendency that's been going on for the past 100 years or so.
I mean, the problem is not so much, my point of view, the increased economic inequality, not to say that's not a problem. If you have inequality, but nobody is living in abject poverty, that's probably a, makes it not that big a problem. But the problem is that economic inequality leads to political power inequality. And that to me is the thing that we worry about, that if we let economic inequality get so pervasive or so bad that people have outsized voices in setting government policy, then we will have a problem.
That's really interesting. So most people would say the issue with income inequality is the fairness aspect. Some people get more, some get less. That's not fair. But you're saying it's not so much. You're saying it's less that. I don't know. You probably still think maybe, but you're saying it's more so the political aspect of it, that the money drives the political policy.
Because I sincerely believe that economic power begets political power, begets economic power, and you have that vicious circle for some of us, a virtuous circle for other people. And that's, I'm not saying economic inequality per se is not a problem, but I'm saying that the fact that economic power and political power go hand in hand makes economic inequality an even greater concern than what people would normally think, just in terms of economics rather than politics plus economics. And few people.
There is certainly. So you're saying that because that economic inequality eventually leads also to the inequality of how people can exert power, right? Like an imbalance of power.
Right, and so once you have power and economic power and political power, then you will probably want policies that perpetuate your economic and political power, and you have a cementing of that, and to the extent that we didn't used to have, and so it's worrisome.
So it's I saw that, in especially in, for example, say the Saving Capitalism documentary. I thought it was talking about how the system works in the United States. That documentary is also based on a book. It's by Robert Reich, who's a former Secretary of Labor in the Clinton and economist.
Little guy.
Yeah.
Little guy, exactly. He's very little but very smart.
Yeah.
Speaks very well. And yeah, he was like describing how I thought that was interesting, the dynamic, right? That you have like these economic powers, the corporations, and then they influence the political process, and by virtue of the money that they invest in the political process, they gain political influence, and that allows them to create rules that will in turn allow them to gain more economic influence, more economic, and then they have more economic influence. They have even more political power. So this is like you said, self-perpetuating cycle.
So did either of these documentaries have some ideas about how to correct it?
That's like belling the cat.
Well, yes. It's not I don't think it's the focus of either of the two documentaries, but at the end, especially in the Saving Capitalism documentary, he's partidary of some sort of like activism. He thinks citizens should be involved in politics and in making sure that decisions are made to favor people and not the corporations, because the corporations, as he points out, I mean, they're after their own well-being. They're not, which is like making money, allowing themselves to make money. That's what they're there for. So it's normal that those are the interests that they're pursuing, but those are not the interests of the people at the same time. Those are conflicting
So
interests.
is he suggesting then that corporations shouldn't exist?
No. I mean, he's not. He what he's suggesting is that the system needs to be less rigged in favor of the corporations and more balanced. And a lot of the documentary is, in fact, it's about the bad decisions that have been made in the past 30, 40, 50 years that have created the imbalance. And things have gotten worse, things like Citizens United, the decision Citizens United that have allowed basically, corporations to have undue influence in the political process. Or there's another very important one that he talked about. What was it called? A Glass-Steagall legislation. Yeah. Which was enacted after I think it was the depression. Yeah, exactly. So that was it was legislation introduced to prevent that from happening again, those kinds of excesses that would create a lot of problems for people. And that legislation was repealed. I believe it was in the 90s or early 2000s. And that, shortly after that, we had major economic crises again that created a lot of problems for people, for the average individual. And then at the end of the day, the government and the taxpayers had to bail out these corporations. So I think a lot of it is about that, how these imbalances are created. And his main point, from what I understood, is that it's a false dichotomy. Like when people create this dichotomy of free market versus regulated market or government interference, he says that's simply not a reality in economics. The reality is, the only question is, how are the rules made? How is the government regulating the economy? Because the government is always regulating the economy. That's the question. It's not free market versus non-free market. That's he says that's just false.
In my opinion, money and politics is like mixing gasoline and matches.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bad combination.
Yeah.
Then my question is, why hasn't it gotten worse even fast? Like, what stopped it from getting worse even faster? So if it's this vicious cycle and money breeds power, breeds money, breeds power, how are humans even still able to live like it? Presumably, and you guys can tell me if you think this is wrong, but presumably our living standard is better off than it was 100, 200 years ago. But if money breeds power, breeds money, breeds power, how is it not totally crippled everyone? How is everyone still able to, I guess, live in life or whatever?
Well, I'll let someone else answer the question, but I just want to point out, Michael, that this is just one statistic that I in these two documentaries.
Yeah, I'm playing devil's advocate. I like to play devil's advocate.
I think it's a good question, and I don't want to answer it, but I will point out that the wages for average people haven't really risen since the 60s. So if you adjust it for inflation, in the United States, for example, it's not a global it's an American statistic. Wages haven't risen since the 60s if you adjust it for inflation. So, and on the other hand, the wealth has greatly risen. So all the excess wealth that has been produced in the past 60 years or so, it has gone to the United States, but not to, the regular Joe, you and me, or everybody here. It has gone to the corporations, the big rich institutions. So that's where the new money or the new wealth being created is going to. Essentially, that's just a simplification, right? But if you look at the fact that, well, there's a lot more money And on the other hand, people make just as much as they would make in the 60s if you adjust for inflation. Well, you know.
So the corporations, they're able to keep us flat, but they haven't been able to drop. Like they haven't been able to cripple us, but they've been able to keep us flat, basically.
Well, you should also think about how one income households are nowadays not sufficient for a lot of people. You know, that didn't used to be the case. You know.
So how has that? I actually find that really interesting. Like, how was it that one income used to be enough, and today it no longer is enough?
For one thing, college was a lot cheaper. Medical care was a lot cheaper, I think. We also bought a lot less things. You didn't have to have, you know, a 2,500 square foot home or whatever, even larger, and didn't have to have, you know, Netflix and cable TV and all those things. Maybe it's just, I don't know, keeping up with the Joneses or whatever, you know, or just being plugged into society rather than apart from it. But yeah, I mean, you didn't have to have a 2-car family and so many things. But but those problems, like the keeping up with the Joneses that you're talking about, that's created by the people, not by the maybe the corporations try to.
No, I think there's a finer point to it. The expenditure has gone drastically up in the last 50 years. And then the prices. So basically, it's a subtraction problem, right? The money you earn versus the money that goes out of the bank. Yeah. So the money that is going out right now is much higher than the money that is coming in.
Right.
And that's because the prices that were supposed to be adjusted for inflation hasn't been adjusted for inflation. But most of the times, if you see the graphs, if you track the numbers, then it's more like an exponential graph. So in that case, your income is not going to meet the expenditure that is required. I think a lot of the time, like if you make like comparison between the house prices and of 1960 or 1950 in the United States to the house prices right now, you'll see the drastic difference. Like just only one last year, like the prices have gone up like by $100,000, and it's not of the houses which had base price of $1 million, but rather houses which had a base price of 300,000. So that makes 33% increase in a base price. So that is the difference. Sort of that is the expenditure of the outgoing net income. That is how much you have to spend to meet the basic things. So and income is not going up by 33%. If the house price is going by 33%, is your income going up by 33%? Not in that level, but in the similar analogy. So because that is not happening, you can't have a comparison.
Right.
And that is why you just can't meet the expenditure right now.
No.
Apart from college prices, healthcare, all these things.
Yeah.
Just the basic commodities.
I mean, yeah, I guess the three things: college costs, housing, and healthcare. It's just, you know, risen and much faster than inflation.
And why are those things going up when everything else is going down?
Yeah, healthcare, I think, really might be very political because I don't know. I haven't read too much about this. So I'm going a lot off of just random things I've heard. But like in other countries, healthcare is much cheaper. And so what I think a lot of the drug companies do is you have a drug that's pretty decent, good enough. And then you have another drug that's like the perfect drug that's been researched, where you've done tons and tons of research and spent, you know, billions of dollars. And a lot of other countries have the good enough drugs, which are like a third the price. But the US, a lot of the drug companies lobby to get the perfect drugs, which might be 3 times the cost. But yeah.
And it's not even the perfect drug. It's just a slightly better drug.
Slightly better.
And the drug companies also, when one of their on-patent formulations are about to go off patent, then they develop a slightly different molecular or whatever, and then get it patented, and then they promote that, and somehow the older drug disappears and people don't even think about it. Like, was it Nexium that replaced something else, and
yeah, there's a big conflict of interest because your insurance just pays for it. So
right.
Yeah, the drug companies can essentially set the price where they want because they're just saying the insurance company is going to pay for it.
And then the U.S., and here's where the unequal access to influencing legislation comes in. In the U.S., the Medicare has been banned from negotiating with the drug companies, unlike any other socialized medical system in the world. And so basically the US charges the highest drug prices because the legislation allows them to get away with it. And so much for the free market, that a lot of people say, we just got to have a free market, and there's no free market in drugs. Could be a lot more efficient, but no, there's none. But yeah, the healthcare system is just set up, in a most inefficient way.
Yeah, I agree. I think I agree. I'm not an expert on it, but I feel like there's a lot of conflicts of interest in healthcare. Like, like a lot of the equipment is like more expensive than it really needs to be. Mm-hmm. So like if you're a doctor, you could say like, oh, well, we really want this extra equipment because this will really give the patient the highest quality of care. And that may be true, but if it's like 50,000 more expensive and it's just minutely, I think it depends on your medical situation. But like, I mean, even a surgery, like people are like, oh, you like the surgeon might say, we need the best possible stuff for this surgery because it's a big surgery. But if that's the difference between it being 50,000 and 200,000, shouldn't there be some say, like, the general public doesn't have a say in that. The surgeon's going to charge the higher amount, and then the insurance company is going to pay that higher amount because they have to. So, yeah.
What I don't understand is sometimes you go to a hospital or a healthcare facility of some kind, and maybe it's an emergency or whatever, and you don't know it, but one of the doctors that spent some time on you is not in your insurance network.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that wasn't an issue 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
Yeah. So yeah, maybe healthcare is a big part of it. I think rent also, like we're talking about housing prices. I mean, yeah, again, I'm not an expert on this. I'm just like throwing out ideas, but we have a bigger population, but we have the same amount of land, and people want to live near the cities, right? So, like, I think that if you just think supply and demand, because there's more people trying to squeeze in a same area.
That is not the exact thing. So last year, like the last 1.5 years, the housing prices going up was hugely caused by private equity. So what the private equity did is that, let's say I want to sell a house. Mm-hmm. Now I want to sell a house, and I want $115,000 for $100,000 house that I bought. A private equity. So if you know about private equity like BlackRock or some of those companies, What they started to do, they had so much cash reserve, they came in and they started buying houses.
Right.
So they came to me and they right out said that you are going to get $150,000 if you put it in Zillow. I'm going to give you $130,000 outright in cash, and you're going to give the money to you're going to give the house to me. So private equity created sort of this housing crisis. So what they did was that they bought a lot of houses across America, but to control the supply in a way, they don't let houses go out on the market at the same time. So let's say they have 500 houses under their control right now. They would just let go of like 50 houses just to see how much prices would go up and how much people would pay for the 50 houses. So this is like manufactured demand. That's what being called in finance.
It's
So
basically monopoly power again, which is a result of,
no regulation whatsoever.
Worsening distribution of income. It's just wealth is so concentrated.
Yeah, and it's simple regulation like saying that, hey, if you're a private equity company, you can't buy more than 5 houses would have solved the problem. But that doesn't
except
happen
that they
here.
have lobbyists and house buyers don't. And so again, this whole economic power begets political power.
This is just one private company that bought all those houses?
Well,
BlackRock was one of the bigger ones.
Yeah. But a handful. And so it's not a monopoly, it's a oligopoly, or one of those things.
And this data and this information are pretty much public. So if you just look into the information, it's out there. It's not even there.
Is that related was that related to the pandemic?
Oh no.
No, it was not pandemic. They were planning to do it. Pandemic perfectly played into the part.
Yeah.
So there are other statistics also, like the amount of like housing that is required in the ratio, like how many people are looking for houses to the amount of houses that are out in the market right now. That is also creating a lot of issues. Why there aren't more houses that are being built when there are a lot of resources out there. So that is one thing.
Yeah.
I am curious about one question here, like to the folks in America here. Like, I know that education was much cheaper back in the day, like 1960s, 70s, 80s. Was healthcare also a lot cheaper back in the day?
Was what?
Healthcare.
Healthcare, like, was that also cheaper, or is that something that has always been pretty expensive?
Healthcare was cheaper. It may not have been as good, but it was cheaper.
Yeah, housing / rent and healthcare. That's like 50% to like 70% of the economy, right? I don't know, but I've heard like healthcare is like a third, and like rent and housing, that's another whatever. Yeah.
This is just an anecdote. It's not a statistic, but in 1960, my mom and dad bought 30 acres of land and a house for $8,000.
Wow.
It took them.
Of course, you got to adjust for inflation, but still, yeah.
Yeah, even if you adjust for inflation,
it's still a lot.
Still a lot. And
well, if you buy land in the country, it's not as it's mainly cities, like
right.
Yeah, you kind of have to control for that, but still.
Plus, also zoning is like they're saying here in the Twin Cities. The zoning laws are basically partly responsible for the increase in housing because of requirements about how much housing can be, what's the minimum size parcel of land for a one-family home, and then there are zones that have just totally banned multiple family homes, and so there is no way to increase the density of housing. And so as population increases, then the demand for housing, of course, rises. And so if your supply is not allowed to expand, then housing prices will increase. That's just simple economics.
So going back a little more high level, Bruno was talking about money creates power, creates money creates power. And I think that might be true to some extent. I'm kind of interested in like what checks are there on that. So like, I feel like ultimately the people, it's this very dynamic system. So ultimately the people elect the government, and the media can sway the people, and money can influence the media, and there's all these things going on, right? But at the end of the day, we all still have one vote, right? Everybody gets a vote. So if you know someone in your family or like one of your friends, and they're going through like a really hard, difficult situation, you might be inclined to elect representatives that will help, or at least say that they will help relieve that person's difficult situation. Now, the thing is, they might not be honest on their promise. They might say they're going to do it, not do it. In which case the other side is probably going to try to call them out on it. But at the end of the day,
or they may not be realistic about what it takes.
Or they might not be realistic about what's needed.
Well, part of the problem is that what politicians say that they're going to do is not what they're going to do, you know, and
right.
That's not just a cliche. That's actual reality. And
so they're deceptive. And the thing is, when they're deceptive, the other side is the opposition is likely going to try to call them out on their deception. So there's like all these factors going on, but
that's true. But they're all doing the same thing, so they can't really call each other out all that much, because both Democrats in the States, both Democrats and Republicans do it. You know, so it's not like they can call each other out all that much.
And
well, they're doing it all the time. They're always calling. It's a constant calling each other out, right? So they're constantly not doing it, and they're constantly calling each other out. And basically, we as the public watch this thing. And at the end of the day, we say, we see them each call each other out. And at the end of the day, we kind of say which one is worse, and we kind of choose the other one. I don't know, but yeah, just kind of talking on the spot here, but
yeah, you know, it's
well, sometimes there's no alternative, right? I mean, one example is like 2016, the race for the presidential race was between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. You know, I mean, who's representing the people there? You know, like both sides were really representing the interests of billionaires, regardless of what they were saying. They were both saying that they weren't. But I mean,
they're both calling each other out too at the same time.
But it's pretty obvious if you do like a minimum research that, you know, Hillary Clinton, you know, if she was going to get elected, she was going to get elected by those people, and Donald Trump was one of those people. So I mean, it's not guaranteed that you're going to have the choices that are not that, you know, like those are the choices. You know,
but
it's
even
the establishment.
You can only get away with so much. You can get away with a lot and still get elected. But at some point, if you're so corrupt, the other side is going to have so much bad information on you that's going to come to light, and the public's going to see that. You can get away with a lot, but you can't get away with an infinite amount. There's a backstop at some point.
Yeah, yes and no, because like I saw like the statistic as well that they brought up in these documentaries, and that is like a pretty it was pretty shocking statistic for me. So there's about, if the public really wants something done, like if the public in general is like overwhelmingly in favor of something, there's like about a 30% chance that thing will ever become some sort of law, right? 30%, even if there's like overwhelming agreement by the public. Yeah. If the public is overwhelmingly against something, there's also about 30% chance that thing will become a law. Like it doesn't really, at the end of the day, I mean, these are statistics that they've come up with looking at legislation and correlating it with the like public support for those laws. At the end of the day, you know, they've concluded it doesn't really matter what the public want in terms of actual results. And on the other hand, there are similar statistics for corporations. And if a basically, it's very different. If a corporation doesn't want something done, there's very little chance that that thing will actually become some sort of law. If the corporations want something done, the likelihood is very high.
I understand what you're saying.
Well, I'm just saying a statistic, right?
To my understanding, what you're saying applies to very large corporations.
Yeah.
Not all corporations.
No.
Most corporations are worth less than $1 million.
The big players, right? Yeah, no, I mean, these are the big corporations that are in Washington that have lobbying power. I mean, another thing that I learned in these documentaries, lots of helpful statistics. For each dollar spent by all the public interests, all of the groups in the United States that are lobbying in Washington right now, for each dollar, there's $34 spent by the big corporations in Washington in lobbying. 34-1, just big corporations against everything else, unions, activists, everything put together. So that's 34-1. So like, that kind of like shows you in a very numerical way, like where the influence is coming from, right? I mean, it's and if you look at, you know, that, I mean, you understand how those statistics about the laws being passed, how that makes sense.
Right,
you know?
right. And it only takes, you know, a handful of, and I don't know what you call it. It's like if the, you know, Philip Morris and what's the other one? The handful of tobacco companies don't want anti-tobacco legislation to be passed. They can stop it, or at least they've been able to stop it for almost, I don't know, 40 years before something actually was able to be done to start chipping, you know, bringing down the addiction rate of teenagers, because basically it's just teenagers who start smoking, and this just gives you an idea of the power that large corporations and that just billions of dollars have in affecting public policy. So
but then that brings up the inevitable question: if there's so much lopsided power in favor of corporations, why do we have the regulations we have then? Why haven't they just gone away? So like, why do we even have a corporate income tax? Why do we even have environmental regulations? Why do we have safety regulation? Like, why haven't, if the power is so lopsided?
Yeah, but it's not a binary thing. Like if you're on top, then you get everything you want. Of course, it's power. It's the balance of power. So you tend to get to get more. You tend to win more of the legislative battles than lose. But of course, there's also you're not going to sponsor something that is just so we say anomalous or so horrible that people actually rise up and call their representatives, say that this is just insane. We're you know, it's something that is important enough for a corporation or a lobby group or some whatever faction to lobby legislators, usually is not important enough, you know, because it affects us only minimally, while you as an individual affects you minimally, but the effect on Philip Morris is like, you know, life and death for them. So
but the thing is, there's a lot of regulations in place now that could be more lax. Like, for example, airline safety, like the amount of like let's say an airline is coming out with a new airplane and they have to do an extensive amount of testing on it, years and years of testing. Why not just make that a little bit more lax? Or like certain things that financial institutions have to follow, like financial professionals, they made a law saying that it used to be they have to like come up with a suitable product for their client. Now, if you're a financial professional, the standard increase, it has to be in the best interest of your client. So I guess there are like why isn't everything just becoming more lax? If the balance of power is so lopsided.
Sure. This is my guess, I think if it's something that the newspapers can write really scary headlines about, then you as a corporation probably won't want to push that. Like, for example, if a newspaper can say United Airlines wants to relax safety procedures, I think that's bad for business for United Airlines. So they're not going to do anything like that.
So PR kind of it might not be a strong enough force, but PR is somewhat of a counterbalancing force against it. Yeah, maybe not strong enough.
But it's only on the really drastic measures that can get ordinary citizens to do something about it. But most of us are passive. We're just like, here's another thing. Because if you have to pay attention to everything, then you probably won't have any energy left at the end of the day to do anything else. So,
Yeah, on the finance side, I can mention like one thing, like after the recession, let's say in 2008, the Congress passed the Dodd-Frank Act, which was a sort of regulation on corporate finance. And in 2016, after Trump got elected, that act was repealed.
Yeah.
And even after Biden came in, there was no Dodd-Frank Act right now. So that was a sort of a regulation that was put in place as a sort of check and balance, and that was repealed, and it's not even in place right now. So how many people does know about Dodd-Frank Act unless until you follow like finance or read Wall Street Journal every day? I don't think there are a lot of people. Number two, the problem with the 2008 crash that happened due to the mortgage crisis, right? I don't know if you have seen like any sort of documentaries on that, or that even the movie Big Short, they talk about those subprime mortgage that created the crisis. It took a recession basically, and a long time they said that this sort of writing of mortgages without any sort of security is disastrous, but no one really cared. And it took a disastrous recession, and that had a worldwide impact to make sure those mortgages are underwritten. So right now, if you go for a bank loan and if you go for a mortgage, those mortgages are much better written, like underwritten by security companies. So the chances of unmitigated disaster are controlled. But you have to, I think the point I'm trying to make is that it took a literal disaster to make those sort of regulation, and which was very little. So that's the issue.
Yeah, I think you're right that often it takes a disaster to get a regulation. So it's like, often the big companies will lobby for something, it won't get passed. All of a sudden, a big disaster comes, hits the public really harshly. That's when they say we need this regulation, and then it's at that point it's very hard for that corporation to stop the regulation. But you shouldn't need a disaster ideally is the point, I guess.
Yeah, I'm only interested in how we got on this roller coaster, as far as it informs us about how we get off it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Any sense?
In
other words, we have clearly identified that there is a problem, but I'm trying to figure out what should we do?
Yeah.
Maybe the only way to stop it is just a disaster has to happen before the legislation gets put in place.
Well, hopefully, how do we stop it without
a disaster?
Maybe there is no way.
No, there's there's a long-term thing I think that's going on as well in terms of the intellectual debate or backdrop on top of which all these things are going on with the economy, with public policy, what's the best policy, what's the best economic policy, is that it, back during the time of Teddy Roosevelt, there was a big outcry about the trusts, the monopolies, right? Standard Oil, U.S. Steel, and all that, and the Congress and the courts responded to it, and they actually broke up, Standard Oil, and the trust buster campaigns or movements during Teddy Roosevelt's time was very vigorous, and the underlying state of economic theory supported it, right? And I think, and this is the conspiracy theorist in me, but it's not really a conspiracy, it's just your natural reaction. The who are funding the economic think tanks and policy think tanks these days, right? They're overwhelmingly funded by, for lack of a better term, conservative, corporate, billionaire interests. So the public debate is hearing only one side of it, and
So there are no liberal think tanks?
not a lot of them. Overwhelmingly, you hear about the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Foundation,
Koch brothers.
yeah, and they're not just funding think tanks; they're funding economic departments. They're funding research programs that of course you're not going to fund something that you don't agree with. And so I think there's an imbalance. We're only hearing one side of the intellectual economic debate. And so when the courts say that, oh, it's fine that Microsoft did this, but we're not going to break them up, and that's a big problem. If the state of knowledge about how the economy works and how that ties up with politics is one-sided, or at least we're not seeing the whole thing, then how do you get a really healthy public debate about what policy should be? And so that takes a longer time frame.
Why do you think that is? Is that a consequence of just power? Because I'm not really sure what's going on behind economic theory. I look at politics, economic theory in politics, which is for the most part dumbed down, right? Because they have to appeal to the masses. But you look at it in politics, and for example, Bernie Sanders, right? He was proposing more the line of let's limit this and let's break them up.
Right.
Let's redistribute the power between these corporations, make it more competitive and less monopolistic. But he was he got his ass kicked by both Democrats and Republicans.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Because
they just crushed him.
Right.
Because in that case, you can see that it's obvious where the power is, right? The power is not with Bernie Sanders. The power is with the Clintons and the Trumps and the Republican establishment, Democrat establishment. That's where the power is.
All the Democrats had to pull out in order to beat Bernie Sanders. Like Elizabeth Warren pulled out.
Yes, again with Biden. Yeah, again. Yeah, they don't want. They certainly don't want Bernie to get ahead. So, but so you feel like where the power is there, but I don't know if that's the same thing for economic economic scientists,
Yeah.
economic theory,
Well,
academics,
let me
think tanks. I'm not
yeah.
sure.
Let me see if I can I'll try to express what I mean by an example in terms of, for example, the economic theory about monopoly. Basic, it's a given accepted by any school of economics, just a basic result in economics that is not contested by anyone, that monopolies are bad, and that all firms, if you really want to maximize your profit, what you want to be is a monopoly, right? And so it's
Like the game almost, right?
yeah, exactly. It's you can get it with your equations, you can get it very simple reasoning, that then you can get it like and so it used to be accepted that of course we want antitrust legislation, we want not to have monopolies then. But then through the years, starting with the standard at the time of Standard Oil, you see this development of thought saying, well, monopoly isn't really that bad. Or you start hearing, one of the favors they come up with is this creative destruction. If you've heard about that, is saying, oh, we shouldn't mind if there are monopolies because there's creative destruction. The monopoly today is going to disappear, and there'll be some other monopolies tomorrow. So there are really no permanent monopolies, and we all benefit because creative destruction will result is basically a side effect of technological growth. If you have new technology, then you destroy the old technology, and so firms that have the old technology will disappear, and their monopoly is gone, and they'll have a new monopoly. But somehow that translated into a policy that we are not going to enforce monopoly as vigorously as we did before, and it just became a blanket sort of policy that monopoly is good because if you allow monopolies, then you will have technological growth. Even though, if you look at the high-tech industry, for example, when does technological development slow down in an industry? It's when a monopoly is established. Like when the PC industry, it kind of like innovation slowed down when Microsoft was king, right? I mean, there's so many small companies that came up with good ideas, and Microsoft would just swat them down because their policy was Windows everywhere. And so it's not true.
Also, like something that I saw that I thought it was really interesting. I didn't know. I mean, related to that is the fact that a lot of those things that are intellectual, sort of like the intellectual property of those companies, for example, most of the things that make a phone, a smartphone, right? A lot of that stuff was developed by also governments, funded by taxpayers' money.
Right.
And that's not something usually we hear about.
No, yeah. Like the basic technologies or the basic science.
Yeah, basic technologies, GPS and all that.
Yeah.
So you explained, so at some point this idea that a monopoly is bad started being sort of like reversed. No, actually monopolies,
it got a little
good.
eroded, and I'm gonna point to the Chicago school as Milton Friedman and his cohorts, who basically I mean,
and what's the situation? What's the situation now? In terms of like theoretically.
Of
like
course, you'll always have a backlash, right? And so now some new theories of monopoly are coming up, and because they're saying, well, let's look at the theory of monopoly in the high-tech age, and in fact, one of the leading lights in that new theory was appointed by Biden to be, I forgot what, Federal Trade Commission or something, and her appointment is being opposed by some legislators, some senators.
So why does she propose? Like what?
Because
what
she's
direction is she
basically saying we need tighter legislation, regulation of monopolies, go back, than we were allowing.
Improve competition in the market.
Yeah. I mean, because there's a big confusion in the public by saying we want free markets. We don't want free markets. We want competitive markets. If you allow markets to be totally free, you will end up with monopolies, in every industry.
Personally, I think that if a financial institution or a business gets to be a certain size and they have over 90% of market share, and the if they fail and their failure would impact the economy,
right,
for everybody,
yeah,
then you break them up.
Yep.
And by breaking up, I don't mean take away ownership. I mean it's like it's okay if a financial institution wants to be a commercial bank and and consumer bank, but if you grow to a size that your failure would impact the economy too much, then it's okay if you own both of those things,
right,
but you have to build a wall between them.
Yeah.
So they have something like that that happened after the financial crisis of 2008. So once a financial company becomes big enough, it's classified as a systemically important financial institution. So there's it's called a SIFI, and they have stricter regulations and reserve requirements than a smaller one.
Yeah, but
so that's an interesting example. I guess it took a crisis for that to happen, right?
Yeah, too big to fail was finally something that people realized is something we need to pay attention to. But
to me, too big to fail is too big to bail.
Yeah.
But so that's interesting.
Except that
so
we have to. Otherwise, if we don't bail them out, they bring everything down.
I know, but if we can see that coming,
right? Exactly.
And we can.
Yeah, and that was basically a something that I guess very few people understood, because that's why they let Lehman Brothers collapse. They said, we can't just bail out everyone. But when they allowed Lehman Brothers to collapse, they just panicked the whole economy, and we got what we got. It turns out they should have rescued Lehman Brothers, but I think what should have been, they should have rescued them and then sent people to jail. But nobody's gone to jail over absolutely, practices that I think are criminal, self-dealing and fraud and, securities fraud, misrepresentation, and nobody went to jail. Only in Iceland did people go to jail, bankers go to jail.
Oh, sorry, you're cutting out a little bit.
After the Great Depression in the 20s and the 30s, and people went to jail.
Mm-hmm. But and again, that's a symptom of the imbalance in power. That you can get away with it, and.
Yeah, I think, and one of the things which bothers me a little bit is that I think a lot of what they're doing, it's just as bad, the big companies, but they do it in a really convoluted way so that it's confusing to really understand what it was that they did that was bad. You have to like go through pages and pages of financial statements, and it's almost like you have to be like a super genius to figure out how it is what they did that they stole money. So that makes it harder to charge them, or and I'm not really sure the best way to deal with that.
No, and the funny thing is, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that our government has some responsibility for it, because they with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, those quasi private public entities,
Right.
At a certain point, they were so interested in getting housing for low income people that they told the bank, you just make the loans and we'll buy them from you. Well, that took all the risk out of it. For the financial institution, there was no risk.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anytime.
Yeah, I think that's a problem. Like often with lending for houses,
Everybody should have skin in the game.
Yeah,
but
it's like,
but see, it's not only the house, because Fannie Mae is basically doing not the I don't want to say lower income housing, but lower priced housing.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Right. Yeah, but
what I have no problem with those entities and their mission.
Mm-hmm.
I have none. But what I have a problem with is telling the bank, you make the loans and we'll buy the loans from you.
Right.
And you have no concern about whether the loan gets paid back or not.
Yeah, but they weren't doing it for those jumbo loans, right? The $400,000, $500,000 houses. And were they? Oh, because I thought these liar loans where a person who definitely cannot afford a $600,000 house would be given a loan by some company, and of course,
Well, that happened too, but yeah,
and I think that was where the major, who knows?
That's my understanding, but
yeah,
I've been wrong before.
Join my club.
Well, some people become very defensive when you talk about income inequality. Just like the mentioning of income inequality, they'll call you like communists and socialists and lazy and jealous of people and successful people.
Well, I think that it is a problem. I think it's a problem when a CEO is paid 300 times what the average employee is making. That is a problem.
Yeah.
And maybe some kind of regulation needs to be put in place. But I'm more interested in identifying the problem only as it informs what kind of legislation we should do.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I agree.
How do we regulate it?
I agree it's a problem, but I want a solution that fixes it at its root. I still think we should have a progressive tax system. I think it could probably be more progressive than it is currently. But I don't think any amount of a progressive tax system will solve the problem to the extent that it could be, versus addressing the root causes.
A progressive tax system is part of the solution, because
it's part of it. Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, sorry, Bruno, you're cutting in and out.
No, it's good. It's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, we can hear you now.
Okay. No, I was saying well, let's go back. What's the principle of a progressive tax system? It's that there should be equal pain for everyone, right? Asking a millionaire to pay, let's say, 10% of their income in taxes is not as burdensome for asking a person making $40,000 a year to pay 10% of his or her taxes. right?
Is that what is that the goal, to make the pain exact?
Yeah, the principle is that the additional burden of a tax is not as onerous
That's true.
on wealthy people as opposed to less wealthy people. And so at the higher income levels, if you're taxing at 40%, the a dollar after a million, it's not even as onerous as taxing a dollar after 30,000, 10% for a person of a lower income level. And so if you think about it, it's the tax system can be even more progressive than it actually is in terms of rate structure. Of course, you have to balance that, say, in terms of, well, if you tax too much, then people will be discouraged from being productive, even more productive. So you have to balance those things.
If you tax too much, the economy won't grow.
Yeah. But the debate has always been, okay, so where should that be?
I don't have I have a little bit of a problem with the rate. I think they could be higher in some cases, but more than that, I have a problem with all of the loopholes.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
That I'm not wealthy enough to take advantage of.
Exactly. And you're not wealthy enough to hire the lawyers and accountants to take advantage of for you. Right.
Well, it's kind of a crazy system when you have corporations.
I'm not hearing anything you're saying, Bruno.
You're cutting in and out.
Every time you speak, it's like something happens with your internet connection and you break up and freeze. Like now.
Yeah, I still wonder, like, why do we why is there a corporate tax at all? And why, like all the regulations that went into place after the financial crisis, they were like why, how did they even get passed but what's really interesting, the regulation I mentioned, it's specifically hardest on the biggest corporations, right? So it's saying the biggest financial institutions have to have more stringent requirements than the smaller ones. So I feel like and it only got passed once there was a crisis. But yeah, do we need a crisis to pass a law, or can we get laws passed before the crisis happens? I think that's kind of an interesting question.
Well, I think the obvious answer is no. Laws can't be, passed until there's a crisis. That's just, I don't know, human nature or the way.
I feel like if we can see the crisis coming, we need to create some kind of legislation.
I think we should, but
getting to an agreement is hard.
Yeah, right. I mean,
well, it depends on. I think it's just a matter of, can you do it or not? I mean, it's obvious that you should. For example, I think it's crazy, that you have like these huge loopholes that you can have Amazon pay fewer taxes than a school teacher, or a Facebook, But it's not even only that. It's the fact that there's also the problem that these companies can just move to Barbados, and even though they do absolutely nothing in Barbados, they can just make their money there, or basically keep their money there and pay no taxes there, or the Bermudas or something like
Bermuda
that, the Cayman Islands, and
Ireland.
And that's another big problem.
Well, my understanding, and I don't know how many countries are involved in this, but my understanding is there was a recent agreement to put a floor on corporate income tax in many countries. like
Mhm.
15% or something like that. I don't know what it is, but in other words, one country couldn't undercut another country by having a lower corporate income tax rate.
Well, there's a proposal to do that.
Oh, there is. It hasn't
Yeah.
passed. Okay.
Yeah, no, it just came up with the new Treasury Secretary. What's her name? She used to be
Janet Yellen.
yeah, chairman of the Fed. But
Yeah, that's why all the companies moved to Ireland, because
right.
Ireland gave them a favorable rate.
Yeah,
That's what,
the EU is
United
fixing.
States.
The EU, I think, is fixing that.
Yeah.
But no. The problem is not what legislation to pass. I think if it's easy to come up with fairly effective legislation, it's okay. How do we get them passed? Because the people who will be negatively affected.
Yeah, it's interesting.
We'll fight it tooth and nail, and they have
really
the resources.
It's a two-part question.
Yeah.
One is, what do we do? And two, how do we do it?
I know. Who's going to bell the cat?
Yeah.
Right. That's always been the problem.
You need
Well,
to.
I see, like, for number one, what should you do? A very easy solution. But the number two is difficult. For the number one is that, at least in the United States, they can limit the political contributions that are made by the big companies.
Right.
So you have this tax that has been formed, and it was something that has to be disclosed, and that was controlled until, I think, if I'm not wrong, until someone like Newt Gingrich or someone, again, case in point, Republican Party officials went to Senate and they kind of dissolved the entire thing.
Yeah.
So if you control the political contribution from the big companies, big corporations, and from big billionaires, at that point you are kind of cutting the tie between the big money and the political power that you have, and try to sort of offset that balance to give something back to people. So that would be a very easy solution, and that would solve a lot of problems. But whether that can be done or not, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah. I mean, that, they tried to do it, and the Supreme Court repealed a lot of the meat of the provisions, I think, and also even the meager law that they were able to pass. And it's just hard. It's because they decided that corporations are people too, and so they enjoy the same rights that you and I do, and I don't know how that happens when the Declaration of Independence clearly said that, believe that all men, which back then meant people, all people are created equal. It didn't say all men and business entities are created equal. But somehow
I mean, part of the problem is it's kind of a bizarre problem, but part of the problem is that the world is being controlled progressively more and more, especially the wealth, by corporations, which are in essence, not even people. So we're not even talking about the highest people at the pyramid of the social pyramid. It's not even the highest people and the lowest people anymore, like it used to be.
Right.
Now it's like, in a sense, all of our wealth, we're producing all this wealth as a planet, as human beings in the planet are producing all this wealth. A huge part of that wealth is going into corporations instead of going to the actual people of the planet.
Yeah.
And it's a very bizarre situation. It's like a little dystopian even.
Yeah.
And this continues to become more exacerbated as we move into the 21st century and further into the century. And this
corporations
and the thing is, there is no malice involved here. There's no, I want to rule the world. There's nothing like that. I mean, it's an impersonal. Our goal is to maximize our profit, and if we
but corporations, the profit
are not. Go ahead, Michael.
I was going to say the profit of, I think is, that's oversimplifying things a little bit, because the profit of corporations, most of it goes to investors. So only a slice of it goes to the, CEO, CFO, whatever. But the bulk of the profit is going to the people that invested in it, right? So,
Yeah, but they don't really
If
have a
it's a
say.
publicly traded company.
Yeah, they don't really have a say on what the corporate policy will be. So it's really who the CEO and the board. It's what they decide they want to do. Is what within constraints of possible litigation or the law. It's
the board is going to decide, what to do more than the investor who just has a couple shares.
Yeah.
But the investor is getting the bulk of the profits. So I guess it's like,
But the biggest investors in these companies are actually the CEOs, right? Like the profit that is kind of distributed are in the basis of how much share we hold, right? So right now, if you say Amazon, that share price is like $3,000, $4,000. Question A, how many people can even afford a share of Amazon? And also, what power do you get from like just one share of Amazon compared to Jeff Bezos's 60 million shares of Amazon?
Right. And not only that, for Google and Facebook, they actually made special shares for example, for Zuckerberg, in that his shares have 10 times the voting power of regular shares in the company. And, why is that allowed by law?
Yeah, so the power is like a very tricky situation with these corporations.
Yeah.
It's a very, 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 very weird system.
I know. Yeah. It's the world we live in.
And I mean, well, and things are gonna get there. It's already weird, but it's I feel that it's gonna get weirder because the advancements of technology. I mean, for sure, the question is, are we going to go the way of horses, like how they became obsolete for the economy? Like right now, our economy is still based on labor, right? Like labor and capital. And the capital seems to have more influence than the labor at this point already. But there will come a point if technology advances enough, and it probably will, by the time the century is over, that labor will have very little power. There will be very little use for labor anymore, because we're going to have computers, we're going to have machines that do things a lot
long
better.
before the end of the century. Try 15 years. Our lifetimes.
We'll probably be kind of there mid-century. Yeah. So at that point, the question is, in 30 years, really mid-century, the power of labor is probably going to be very reduced. It's already less influential than the capital power, than the power of the leadership of the corporations, all that. But what happens when the power of labor is almost eroded? What's the power balance of society going to be?
Will be like a feudal England.
It might be. I think we should think about it. I mean, it's an interesting conversation for us to speculate a little bit, but this is very relevant because we're really not talking about the far into the future. Like you're saying, David, it's not even like, the end of the century. It's like more like mid-century we're talking about, and even kind of like before that even. So that is a very relevant thing. Like, what's going to happen when labor keeps losing power in relation to capital, and what's going to happen in terms of the balance of power in society?
Well, there is a push now to increase the minimum wage, and I do think people should be paid enough, more than they are. But at the same time, if you go too far with the minimum wage, it makes the cost of automation that much more enticing.
Yeah.
In fact, in Russia right now, there's a KFC that is staffed by robots, automation. Now, if McDonald's can automate cooking a burger and building a burger for $100,000, that's cheaper than hiring an employee for 5 years.
That's going to happen, don't you think? I mean, that's
Yeah.
probably going to happen
for
eventually.
sure that's going to happen.
Yeah,
And there's
so
no
like
payroll tax,
Right.
there's no vacation,
I don't think
sick
you'll.
leave. They're
I
gonna
don't
do
think
it.
I don't think they can compete for very long. You know, in some industries like that one, I mean, how can you compete against that? You know, how can you compete against that setup for very long? I mean, you can't.
Well, I guess what
because
I'm
machines
saying
are going to be so more efficient, right?
is
That it'll make no sense.
raising the minimum wage just makes the return on investment of automation that much faster.
Well, I agree, but I think that we can even think about the fact that no matter what they do, I mean, those people are going to lose their jobs. It's a matter of time, and I mean, what do we do with those people at that point? And how are they going to eat? How are they going to live? And what are they still going to be full citizens if they cannot access any sort of economic, power or economic opportunity? Are they still going to be able to participate?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's a difficult question, but I do think that we're going to face this question very soon, like in the real world, not just here.
Right.
But then, there are some people that say, well, this is actually not a problem because we'll just create new jobs. But I'm not so convinced that there are enough jobs to replace all those jobs that are going to be lost.
Right.
I'm not convinced either.
Yeah, because it used to be the underlying premise of that is that as other jobs disappear, new ones will be created to take advantage of the particular talents, abilities of humans, which is basically our cognitive abilities. If you have artificial intelligence that is advanced enough, then that whole line of reasoning disappears. That if actually, so you can think, so you can solve problems. Well, I've got a machine that can do that too, and they won't complain. So then what's the economic value of a human being in that case? And we haven't ever confronted anything like that in, I don't know, 200,000 years of Homo sapiens, and we don't know how to deal with that.
And I think one solution would be the UBI.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one solution would be the one that's why Andrew Young proposed the scheme of UBI.
Yeah.
Basically start giving people money.
Mm-hmm. Just to keep the economy rolling.
I mean, it could be a solution. I don't know. We haven't set it out yet, but it could be a solution. But it does seem that unless I think the somewhat unlikely possibility of us finding enough jobs to replace all the jobs that are lost, I mean, we will have to find some sort of provision to kind of like make that adjustment.
Right.
Or people will just be screwed.
Yeah, and which is always how it's been.
Which is a possibility as well.
No, but that's always how it's been. Like, for example, when the coal mines shut down in the United Kingdom, I happened to be there in 1984 when Thatcher was shutting down the coal mines, and albeit they really were uneconomical, the coal miners knew, and that's the end of it for them. There's nothing else for them to do that will be as well-paying or as maybe even rewarding, satisfying. So they just, went on the dole and just lived out the rest of their lives in slow burning misery. And
help me on. I think universal basic income is a good idea. What I don't understand completely, probably because I haven't thought it through enough,
right,
precisely where does the money come from?
It will be from the taxes paid by basically the corporations or whoever, the companies who are making so much money and not hiring people. And you basically tell them, hey, you better pay taxes, and we need to fund a universal basic income. Otherwise, you will not have any customers.
Okay, so you just take it from Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and okay.
And if the alternative is they don't have anyone to sell their products to, I guess they'll say, I'll be a outstanding citizen of my country, and
I'm confused about what that legislation looks like.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
I guess we have to wait for the disaster first before that legislation will be passed.
Oh yeah,
Right.
we'll probably have to wait for the disaster first in this case. But I mean, that's also a good point that, if people are so miserable that they cannot like even buy food, let alone, I mean, are they going to buy the products that these companies are producing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if they don't have the money, if they don't have any sort of economic opportunity, those companies they can have robots, but they also wouldn't work because they can't really sell their things to anybody.
Yeah, and they know that. They're smart people. I mean, wasn't that what Henry Ford said? That's why I pay my
Henry Ford, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, Henry Ford. I mean, he decided that he needed to pay his workers because if not, his workers couldn't buy his cars, right?
Yeah.
So,
but it wasn't his workers really who bought his cars, but then just the general multiplication effect.
No, but I mean, it kind of I mean, there was a correlation, right?
It was,
It was the same thing. I watched a documentary not so long ago, so I know even a little bit more about Fiat, which was basically the Italian Ford, and he copied it from, I think, from Ford, and he was like, people don't have enough money to buy the cars, so we really need to pay them more, or this is just not going to work. But that was exactly the reasoning, and it worked. They were employing so many people in the city of Turin in Italy that, I mean, it really was a concern. So, but it worked. Workers had enough money, to pay for their things, and they could buy a car. They bought cars. But if you did have a thriving economy in the city, at the end of the day, they couldn't have had enough customers to make the factory become sustainable and be a superpower like it was. So I think we're gonna see. I think you made a very good point, Raul. I think if their economic model is to work, they probably need to create their market.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I know that.
Well, actually, you don't even, here's the thing, like you don't even necessarily need to sell anything once your AI is good enough. You could just have your AI work for you. You don't need a product, right? So I wonder if, like, with like when we talk about automation, if the robots
but there's a problem there, Michael, because corporations are designed to create profit.
So currently corporations sell goods, but once AI gets strong enough, maybe selling will become pointless. You just have the robots work for you and they do everything and you don't need to sell.
But the corporations are not people. So
whoever owns
can't really work for the corporations.
You have to think that
we're talking about
more, Michael. Yeah.
We're talking about abstract entities that will control the world, that already control the world, but will control the world even more. And it's not a joke. I mean, it's really what's going to happen.
Yeah.
They won't have
but
necessarily the political power, but they'll have the economic power. They already have the economic power, but they'll have even more economic power.
yeah.
I guess from my thinking, and this, Michael, this is a little more intermediate than what you're talking about, but I'm all in favor of people making enough money to buy products. I guess to me, it sounds like there might be some pitfalls in having the government decide how much people should be paid. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, the government.
What are the pitfalls of a government deciding how much people should be paid?
So the government currently does that, just not to that extreme where it's like, yeah.
Well,
yeah, I mean, you're right. Like when the government regulates a minimum wage, that's exactly what the government is doing. But
I'm not talking about minimum wage. I'm just talking about period.
No, I know, but I think Michael kind of has a point there that there is already a degree of like controlling how much people make, that goes into what the government does, but certainly not as much as, like
not
if
setting
was a
it
universal-
outright, and
Yeah.
But that will be something that has to be determined for if there's a universal basic income, because you don't have basically a supply and demand or market mechanism that will determine what the people on UBI are going to get. It's going to be determined by, what's the level that will keep the economy moving along smoothly.
But going back to what I said, what if the AI gets so good that everyone can basically get a robot that does whatever they want? So like if that's true, like there really is no point. Like at some point, selling stuff will be. Like if the AI gets good enough, why do we need to sell stuff? The AI does what we want.
Well, the AI will still need raw materials, right?
The AI will get the raw materials.
Oh, well.
No, my first question is, where are you getting this AI from?
We still got to get there. It's still
who's paying for the AI?
And where the individual customer, like you're saying that everyone is using the AI, right? So are we making the AI at our own houses, or we have to obtain the AI, right?
Yeah.
You would need one generous person. So you need one generous person that's like, hey, I have this AI stuff. The AIs can just build themselves and give them to everybody. You need like one generous person, but once you have that one generous person, everybody's got whatever they want pretty much.
Has anyone here seen the Pixar movie WALL-E?
Yeah, right? WALL-E.
Yeah.
That's what Michael is describing, that spaceship in in the sky where all the human beings live. That's what you're describing.
Well, this is very.
No, but still, I have questions though. Like the AI needs servers and a lot of logistical issues, right?
The AI figures that out. Well, if the AI is smarter than us, it can figure out the logistical issues and the servers and all that.
Yeah, it's an open-ended what you call this thought experiment where you just say, well, let's assume AI is God, basically, and so
but I do think that could be a possibility. Like what Michael is describing at some point.
Yeah.
But I don't. That's going to be reality for a long time, because I think before.
I think it's going to be a reality sooner than you think.
Right. But see.
Go ahead.
What I'm thinking, knowing human nature, what it is, if AI is going to be that powerful, there will be somebody, some person, some group who will take control of that AI, and the rest of us will be all screwed.
Well,
let me give you an
that's
idea.
what I was gonna. That's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
Last November, Apple came out with the M1 chip, and that has 16 billion transistors on it.
Yeah.
A week ago Tuesday, a startup company called Cerebrus made a chip with 1.2 trillion transistors on it.
Mhm.
20% more transistors than neurons in a human brain.
Mhm.
They're still not the same thing.
No,
We still
still
have a
not the
lot of
same.
software to develop,
right.
but the technology is getting there faster than we think.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's getting there. And then MIT just developed a superconducting magnet that is stronger than anything else before, I think. And now they're saying we have magnets strong enough for fusion power. You know, it just came up with it. You know, and it's mind-boggling what's coming down the pike.
Yeah,
Hopefully-
but I think in this dystopian situation, what you're talking about, then humans should be living in an AI-controlled world, right? So if
Yeah.
AI has the logistical issues solved, AI can control the server and everything, and it doesn't need anyone, then
Mhm.
essentially humans are living in an AI-controlled world. Then
Yeah.
all bets are off. Like, we cannot talk about any of the constraints that we are currently talking about,
Right.
because
We'd have to
just, like,
program some, and this is where it gets really philosophical. We'd have to program like some starting ethics into it. Like we'd have to somehow like program limitations into the initial design of it that it can't break. And then, yeah, how do we know that'll work out all fine and
no,
dandy?
I understand that, yeah. But then the question that you are proposing, it's contradictory. Like, if you're talking about AI solving everything and AI then controlling the world in a sense, then we don't have any power, or we are not controlling anything. But if we have control, then we have control over the AI. You know what I mean? So one thing or the other, in a sense.
Yeah.
Hmm.
We just need to have control of the plug, I guess.
An ability to
Yeah,
pull the plug, but yeah,
You know.
but
But then
that's
we will be
dangerous.
But the
controlling a
AI
lot
will
of different
figure that
things.
out. Nah, it's interesting, but I don't think it's enlightening.
Hmm.
That type of
Before it's just one AI. I don't think it'll be like one AI for a long time. You're just gonna have, artificial intelligence with machines, but pretty much just like, for example, cars that can drive themselves, and those will be engines of the economy. But it's not like they're going to belong to everybody. They're going to belong to the company. So say Uber is gonna own them, not you, and Uber is gonna make all the money that those self-driving cars can produce. So I think that's gonna originate a whole lot more income concentration and income inequality. So we have to deal with that before we get into the Star Trek future of one AI that produces
One AI.
everything for everybody.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder if
And I think-
billionaires, yeah.
And I
Or-
mean, if you at that point, if you own Uber, then you're great. But I mean, who owns Uber even? I don't know. Is it one guy? Is it, it'll probably be a public owned company, and then maybe you can get one share of Uber, and you'll have no say like we do for all these companies.
One sec, I gotta plug this in.
Uber is publicly owned now, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, Uber is publicly traded because
Yeah.
their CEO got kicked out.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, kicked out.
But even I mean, still the ownership is ownership of stock is really concentrated with a higher income segment of society, plus retirement funds and those things.
You're saying that you have. Yeah.
Sorry, you're cutting in.
Were
and
you
out.
saying that you had to go, Mike?
Oh no, I just said I had to plug in my computer.
Oh, okay. So yeah, maybe this in the next 5-10 minutes. Do you guys have anything that we haven't explored yet that you wanna you want to bring up?
with not much.
Yeah, well, I mean, so one thing I think is it depends on the time for. So we asked about income inequality. I think the time frame matters a lot. Are we talking the next decade, the next 1,000 year, or the next like 100 years? Yeah, because I feel like there's what we should do right now in the state of the current situation, and that's probably very different from the policy we should put in place when there's like an AI that like automates lots and lots of stuff. So yeah.
I think it's something that needs to be dealt with as soon as possible.
As soon as possible.
I mean, at least start recognizing the problem in the first place. And
What's interesting is nowadays there's actually a labor shortage. So
yeah,
basically currently we need more labor. We need more actual physical labor. Like a whole bunch of businesses are cutting down their hours. Wendy's, like the haircut place, like all these businesses everywhere I see are shortening their hours and stuff like that because they can't find enough physical manual labor.
yeah.
But sooner or later, once we automate it, would flip. So there's like, yeah, we should definitely start thinking about it though right now, preparing. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I think that's a good point. Well, should we, well, it was a good discussion. Should we end it here?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
We've exhausted it for now.
Thanks, Bruno.
Yeah, I'm also having a little bit of internet problems, I think.
Are you on DSL,
so-
Bruno?
I'm on what?
DSL? Is that are you with, who's your carrier?
I'm with
You're cutting in and out.
Yeah, they don't want
He's with a monopoly right now.
they don't want
Spectrum,
him
it
to tell us.
sucks. Spectrum, this really sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's why you have to go with the monopoly.
yeah, this freaking thing. I mean, I get it as part of my condominium association fees and stuff, but yeah, it really sucks.
Yeah.
But anyways, I'm gonna end the YouTube, Ellie.